First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahushai, Bahasham, Racha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of 1 Corinthians, the 7th chapter. And here Paul addresses some of the questions that the church at Corinth had, in particular related to, marriage and abstinence, dealing with women, and how to sort of go about that in a right way where it's balanced with the spirituality, because you had certain believers that would either go to one extreme or the other, right? And in the sense of thinking that by abstaining you are even though you do have more time to focus on the word, there's still a balance. Right? You can't just say, well, I got a wife, but I'm just gonna put her to the side because I'm doing it for the sake of the Lord. It's okay, I'm gonna just neglect her or not give her the duty of marriage. You can't do that, right? In addition, if you are in a certain situation, you were called, whatever situation you're in, don't make haste and try to just, you know what, F this, I'm quitting my job. I'm divorcing my wife. I'm leaving all this behind, because that's only going to bring, a more stressful situation to you, right? And that's not the point of the Lord calling you into this truth. So this is the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 1. Now concerning the things whereof ye wrote unto me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. So here, the Apostle Paul is addressing, right? Because from chapter 7, this is more so, like I mentioned before, the inquiries that they had concerning this matter. So he's saying concerning this matter, yes, it's good to be celibate, right? Concerning dealing with a woman, given your position. Nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband, right? So he's saying, to because of this high level of sexual immorality, and to avoid sleeping around and just going in that direction, given into those kinds of lust and temptation, it's better, if every man has his own wife and every woman has her own husband. Because that way, you if you have an urge, or you want to deal, you have a wife, you can deal with her, right? If a woman, she needs to deal, she could deal with her husband, and you don't have to worry about any of these complicated situations when it comes to that. It says here, let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise also the wife unto the husband, right? So your conjugal rights, in other words, right, the duty of marriage. I'll read this in the NLT and the NIV, but it says here, the husband should fulfill his wife's sexual needs, and the wife should fulfill her husband's needs. NIV, the husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. Okay, that's those conjugal rights. And he's saying this because to avoid a situation which he addresses later on in this chapter, of you defrauding one another. That is, you withholding, that that thing, for lack of a better word, from your spouse, for the sake of, you may say, well, I'm trying to focus more on the Lord, or focus more on my spirituality, but that's not good, because you're married. So you have to render, as it says, your wife due benevolence, and the wife likewise to the husband. The wife hath not power of her own body, but the husband, and likewise also the husband hath not power of his own body, but the wife. And Paul isn't saying here that basically just go and get abused by each other. What he's saying here is, she doesn't have, sole authority over her own body, as in to just completely abstain from her husband against his will, right? Because that, as he goes into verse 5, is going to work against that marriage, right? It's going to work against him, and that's not the way to be. So he's letting them know, like, yes, preferably if you can, being by yourself is really the best way, because you don't have to worry about the trouble in the flesh. But if you're married, don't keep in mind that it's not only up to you, whether and how you want to go about doing this, because you're in a marriage with another party, right? That is either your husband or your wife. So when you make decisions like that to abstain, let it rather be together, right, with consent. Verse 5, defraud ye not one another, except it be with consent for a time. And that defrauding is mainly to like deprive of sexual relations, right? So don't just deprive you starving out the other. Now they getting sexually frustrated, right? That's the actual thing, sexual frustration. As he says here, except it be with consent for a time. So except both of you agree on it for a certain time. Like, okay, for the next week or a couple of weeks or whatever, however amount of time you agree, to go that route, that ye may give yourselves to fasting and prayer and come together again. So you might set some time aside. So you know what, let's abstain from it for the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and let's just focus on being locked into the spirit. Fast is like a fast from it, and afterwards, you get back together again. You do your thing, and that way, as he says, that Satan tempt you not for your incontinency. Incontinency here being your lack of self-control. And what that means is, what happens when one party is getting constantly neglected? Eventually, Satan might creep in there. He could creep in there. Maybe he should creep in. That's a joke. He might creep in there to cause the attention that is being, let's say one partner is sexually frustrated or, feeling deprived. Somebody else, because that's you have a lot of cases like that, right? They might seek that elsewhere. And whenever you have Satan in the mix, he might put you out your right mind, and next thing you know, one thing leads to another, and you end up in a bad case because of your lack of self-control. Because she's burning or he's burning, and the other party is like, well, I'm abstaining for the Lord, and then the other party, goes for a period of time, and eventually they're like, you know what, F it. They get mad, and then next thing you know, you got a love trapezoid. Not even a triangle, a trapezoid. Verse 6, but I speak this by permission and not of commandment. Now, when you go into that word permission, let's see, it says here, pardon, indulgence. In the Strong's definition, it says concession, right? And let's look up that word concession. It says here, a thing that is granted, especially in response to demands, a thing conceded. So he's saying, I'm giving you this, I speak this as a response to your questions or to your queries, not as a commandment, but I'm giving you an answer. For I would that all men were even as myself, because the Apostle Paul was like a spiritual eunuch, right? Meaning like his he abstained from women as so he could dedicate all his time and focus to the work of the Lord. And he's saying, honestly, I would that everybody was like me, or all of you were like me, but every man hath his proper gift of God, one after this manner and another after that. So he's saying like the Lord has given everybody their own gifts, and not everybody can do what I do, right? Not everybody can be in that spirit I'm in. So, ideally, that's what I would want, but that's not the case, right? So I say, therefore, to the unmarried and widows, it is good for them that they abide even as I, right? So he's saying, really, it would be better for you that are unmarried and widows not to seek to be married, right? But to stay single. But if they cannot contain, let's look at that word contain. We all know what it means, but let's see what was written here. To be self-controlled, continent, right? To be temperate in diet and chastity, right? That's in the Strong's definition. To exercise self-restraint in diet and chastity. That is to abstain, to be celibate. So he's saying here, not everybody has the same level of self-control, right? Some have higher libido levels. So if you can't, if you're one who just, you just can't stay single, then let them marry, right? You get a woman, or if you're a woman, get a man. For it is better to marry than to burn, right? And that burn, like I mentioned before, an example being like being sexually frustrated as a result. When you're very hungry, you become hangry, like that Snickers commercial, you're not you when you're hungry. There's a similar reaction when you're deprived of a different kind of food. And you know what I mean. So first, where we at? Actually, in the Strong's definition, even in the biblical usage, it says here, right, to be on fire, to burn, to be incensed, indignant, that's angry. In the Strong's definition, it says here, figuratively, to be inflamed with anger, grief, lust. Now, let's type in here, sexual frustration, meaning. So sexual frustration means feeling distressed, agitated, or irritable because your sexual needs, desires, or arousal aren't being met. Okay, and this could be due to many, different kinds of reasons, but one of those being being deprived. So it's better, right, that you marry. That's why he said, for that sake, let every man have his own wife and every woman have her own husband, right? It's better to marry than to burn. And unto the unmarried I command, yet not I, Slakia, and to the married. So he says, concerning the unmarried, this is what I'm saying, right? This is advice from me. But concerning those that are married, this is what I'm commanding you, but it's not really my commandment, but the Lord's. Let not the wife depart from her husband. And if she depart, let her remain unmarried. So let the woman stay with her husband. But if she happens to leave, they separate, let her remain unmarried, or be reconciled to her husband, go back to her husband. And let not the husband put away his wife. Remember that the Lord said, Yahushua said when they asked him, why then did Moses allow us to, have a write a bill of divorce? And he said, because of the hardness of your hearts, Moses suffered you to do so. But from the beginning, it was not so. As it is written, the two shall become one flesh. So in the eyes of the Lord, really, he's not a fan of divorce, right? He doesn't necessarily want you to be separated, but sometimes it's needed, right? It's needful. So as he's saying here, really, if you're one that's married, don't go and just, as it says, leave, describing here like with a woman, right? Don't go and leave your husband, and the husband don't put away your wife. But to the rest speak I, not the Lord. So he's saying like, let's say you were married and then you heard the gospel and you believed. You may have an unbelieving wife. You may have a certain life that you were living as a married man. Don't just throw all that away and say, all right, now I'm giving everything to the Lord, so I'm divorcing you and I'm putting you away. Don't do that. But to the rest speak I, not the Lord. So he's saying, for what I'm about to say now, this is from me, right? But not commandments of the Lord. If any brother hath a wife that believeth not, and she be pleased to dwell with him, let him not put her away, right? So if you have an unbelieving wife, but you're happy together, right? She wants to be with you, don't put her away. Don't divorce her. Don't leave her. And the woman which hath an husband that believeth not, and if he be pleased to dwell with her, let her not leave him. Same thing in reverse. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. That is, whichever party is believing brings holiness, you could say, right, to their to their marriage. Else were your children unclean, but now are they holy because of you. Because if both of you were unbelieving, then your child would be raised in an unbelieving household, right? But because one of you at least is a believer, you never know. But your influence, because you're a holy vessel, right, of the Lord, your influence, could sanctify both your children and your unbelieving spouse, as Paul goes on to expound on. Verse 15, but if the unbelieving depart, let him depart. So if it just happens to be where, you come into this truth, you believe, but whoever you're with, wants to leave, you can't stop them, right? So if they want to leave, let them go. A brother or sister is not under bondage in such cases. So if that's the case where you have an unbelieving spouse and they decide to leave, then you're fine. You're not bound onto them in that case. But God hath called us to peace, right? So the Lord, because the Lord has called us to peace through him, if you have an unbelieving partner and they decide to leave, then hey, then they're gone, right? You're not bound to them anymore. But what knowest thou, O wife, whether thou shalt save thy husband? Or how knowest thou, O man, whether thou shalt save thy wife? That's why he's saying, don't just get up and say, all right, I'm out, I'm bouncing, because you don't know if through your belief, the Lord might have mercy on your unbelieving wife, right? or through the wife's belief, the Lord might have mercy on the unbelieving husband. Maybe they might even get influenced by your actions and your deeds, and the Lord might open their eyes. You never know that, right? So that's what Paul's saying here. But as God hath distributed to every man, as the Lord hath called everyone, so let him walk. And so ordain I in all churches. And what he's saying here is whatever situation or, position you were in when the Lord called you, that's what was distributed to you. That's your lot that you were in. Let him walk. Like, don't try to do a 180 when it comes to, maybe your living situation or the condition you're in, just because you are called now into this truth. You do a 180 with the mindset, and you put on the mind of Yahweh Shai, but don't just start throwing everything out of your life. Because once again, it's going to do, in the long run, it's going to come bite you in the ass. So I'll read that in the NLT as well. Verse 17. Each of you should continue to live in whatever situation the Lord has placed you, and remain as you were when God first called you. He's not saying continue to be living the old man, but maybe you were married, maybe you had kids, then you came into this truth. Don't say, oh, well, now I'm going to divorce them and you take care of the kids, I'm out, right? Or now I'm in the truth. Okay, now you're not getting nothing, you're not, I'm being celibate from now on. Like, don't try to make those rash moves. This is the rule I laid down in all the churches. Is any man called being circumcised? Let him not become uncircumcised. Is any called in uncircumcision? Let him not be circumcised. So Paul is saying here, he's not forbidding it. Well, obviously, in the sense of if you're circumcised, don't become uncircumcised, and vice versa. The point he's making here is, if this was the state you were in when the Lord called you, you're not obligated. Like, your salvation is not going to be based on whether you change from that, especially when it comes concerning circumcision. Right now, in the spirit, the Lord dealing with you, you might get to a certain point where the Lord would put it on your spirit to, if you were uncircumcised, to say, you know what, the spirit is on me to want to go and do this. But as he's saying, circumcision in verse 19 is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing but the keeping of the commandments of God. So if you don't have the means, or you don't get circumcised and you're called into this work, and he's saying here, if you keep the commandments of the Lord, he can still deliver you. You can still gain salvation. Let every man abide in the same calling wherein he was called. Right. And that's going back to the point that the Apostle Paul made earlier. NLT, yes, each of you should remain as you were when God called you. Art thou called being a servant, or in other words, a slave? Care not for it. But if thou mayest be made free, use it rather. So if you were called to become a believer, but, let's say back in the world, you were somebody's slave or somebody's servant, don't let that bother you. Now, if you get a chance to, and like, as in to get your freedom, yeah, go ahead and take advantage of that. But don't let that bring you down or like mess you up. Verse 22, for he that is called in the Lord, being a servant, is the Lord's freedman. So in the world or in your situation, you may be somebody's servant or slave, but in Yahushua, you're a free man. So nobody's going to treat you as, oh, this person is a slave or this person is a servant, so they're below me, or they can't do certain things, in the church because they're a slave. No. Likewise, also he that is called, being free, is Hamashiach's servant. See, so you may be a free man in the world. You may, have your freedom, have, things going for you. But when you come to the faith, you are servants like everybody else. So we're all on like a level playing field. We're all servants of Yahweh Shai. Your status in the world doesn't determine your status in the truth. Ye are bought with a price. Be not ye the servants of men. Right. And that price was, from Yahweh Shai's sacrifice. So we're not to be, enslaved to the world. Verse 24, brethren, let every man wherein he is called, therein abide with God. All right. Each of you, dear brothers and sisters, should remain as you were when God first called you. And he's saying this to them because, they were, remember that some of them, really most of them, were still young in the spirit. Right. And so just like when you first come into the truth and you're very zealous and you're trying to, change your whole life and do a 180 overnight. Oh, I don't do this anymore, I'm cutting that out. I don't do that anymore, I'm cutting that out. I'm cutting this out, cutting this out, cutting this out. Eventually, like you tread into that territory of being over righteous, and then it'll start to affect you in a negative way and really make you less productive, counterproductive, right? So Paul is saying here, just focus first on growing in the spirit, and taking things one step at a time. Don't try to, jump leaps and then you slip and bust your lip and now you're bleeding all over the place. That's a metaphor. Verse 25, now concerning virgins, I have no commandment of the Lord, yet I give my judgment as one that hath obtained mercy of the Lord to be faithful. So concerning virgins, right, those that are unmarried, he's saying here, I don't have commandments of the Lord, right, as in like the Lord said you got to do this or you got to do that, but this is the judgment I give you, as one that is a servant of the Lord. Verse 26, I suppose, therefore, that this is good for the present distress. I say that it is good for a man, a man to be so, or a man so to be. In the NLT, it says, because of the present crisis, I think it is best to remain as you are. Or, in other words, for crisis or the pressures of life. Verse 27, art thou bound to a wife? Seek not to be loosed. So if you're married, don't go seeking a divorce just, because, all right, I came into the truth, I'm a believer now, so now I'm a leaver. Art thou loose from a wife? Seek not a wife. So if you are single, don't be so hasty to try and put yourself in a relationship, because given the situation you're in, like the Most High will provide in due time. But if you try to force it, you might end up somewhere you don't want to be. Verse 28, but if thou marry, thou hast not sinned. So he's saying here, look, dealing with the extremes that they were thinking when it came to balancing marriage, relationships, and, serving the Lord. He's saying marrying is not wrong, right? It's not a sin to marry. And you're not more superior than somebody else if you are abstaining. It doesn't put you on a higher spiritual level. Now you are able to do more, but it doesn't mean that you're better than the next man because he decided he wanted to marry and you were like, nah, I'm a exercise self-discipline. So as he says, but if thou marry, thou hast not sinned. And if a virgin marry, she hath not sinned. Right? So if she was unmarried, she's a believer, but she ends up getting married, she hasn't sinned. It's not like, oh, you're putting your worldly life before the Lord and you're getting married and now you have all these responsibilities. And no, yeah, you're gonna have responsibilities, but that's part of life. Nevertheless, such shall have trouble in the flesh, but I spare you. See, so you will have trouble due to, that's how it is in relationships, right? You'll have trouble, you'll be stressed, you'll have responsibilities. And that's why Paul is saying here, I'm trying to spare you of that by giving you this advice. But it's not a sin if you go and get married. But this I say, brethren, the time is short. it remaineth that both they that have wives be as though they had none. And here is showing you that they hoped that the return of the Lord would be, closer, possibly even in their time. But as the Apostle Paul is saying here, basically, the time is short, right? So you got to be of the mindset that even if you have wives, be as though they had none. Like, don't let that consume you, right? You may have a wife, you may have responsibilities, but don't let your only focus be on your marriage. And they that weep as though they wept not, and they that rejoice as though they rejoice not, and they that buy as though they possess not. So if you're weeping, like maybe you're not in the happiest situation, you might be in a marriage that you're not happy with, right? Or you might be in a situation where everything is good. You're married to some fine shit, right? That's a joke. But, life is sweet. Don't get consumed in the situation that you're in, right? And they that buy as though they possess not. Don't be attached to your possessions. And they that use this world as not abusing it. So don't overuse the things. Yeah, you have to live in the world. Yeah, you have to, use it to a degree, but don't get attached to it, and using it in excess. For the fashion of this world passeth away. It's all temporary at the end of the day. But I would have you without carefulness. Carefulness meaning without like the stress of the cares of this life. He that is unmarried careth for the things that belong to the Lord, how he may please the Lord. Right. So one that is free from, the responsibilities of a married life can spend more of his time to think and do the things that are for the Lord. But he that is married careth for the things that are of the world. This is not saying like you don't care about the Lord and you only care about the things of the world. He's saying here that you now have to, bear the responsibilities of a married life, right? Of not just your wife, but you got to make sure that you're working. You got to make sure you have income. You're taking care of the house. Like you're providing for your household, right? As he says, how he may please his wife. These are all part of your responsibilities now. There is a difference also between a wife and a virgin, right? One that is married versus one that is unmarried. The unmarried woman careth for the things of the Lord, that she may be holy both in body and in spirit, because she doesn't have the responsibilities of marriage because she's unmarried. So she can dedicate more of her time and her life to serving the Lord. But she that is married careth for the things of the world, how she may please her husband. Careth here meaning that she has to also consider and focus on the responsibilities that come with being married, right? Taking care of your husband, taking care of your house. All of those are in addition to serving the Lord. And this I speak for your own profit, not that I may cast a snare upon you. So he's saying, I'm saying these things, not to put like restrictions and pressure upon you, but really for your own benefit, but for that which is calmly, and that ye may attend upon the Lord without distraction, right? That's why he's saying, this is why I'm giving you this advice, that if you can, and you're by yourself, remain that way, it'll be better for you, because you can serve the Lord without the stress of, I'm neglecting my wife, or she's constantly, nagging me for attention, or all these different things. You can, serve the Lord without distraction. But if any man think that he behaveth himself uncomely toward his virgin, if she pass the flower of her age, and need so require, let him do what he will. He sinneth not, let them marry. So let's say one is betrothed, right, to a virgin, to a woman, and because of this situation he's in, where he wants to dedicate his time to the Lord, but he feels like he's being unfair to her because he's abstaining, and now she's getting to the point where she's passing the flower of her age, as in the point of her her peak, or the peak of her youth, to be married, and the need so requires. So now he's in a situation where it's like, look, you got to do it. Then let him do what he will, right? Let him marry her. It's not a sin to marry. I'll read this also in the NLT. It says here, but if a man thinks that he is treating his fiancée improperly and will inevitably give in to his passion, let him marry her as he wishes. It is not a sin. Verse 37, nevertheless, he that standeth steadfast in his heart. So if on the other side, you have individuals that may be more firm in their minds, more resolved in their minds, having no necessity, right? They're not betrothed. They don't have a need. There's no pressure on them to be married, but hath power over his own will. So he has a great level of self-control to keep himself, just celibate, and have so decreed in his heart that he will keep his virgin, right? So he is resolved in his mind, look, I'm making myself a spiritual eunuch. All right, I'm not going to deal with a woman, in that sense, so I can focus on the Lord. That's what it means by keep his virgin. He doeth well, right? And let's look into that word virgin here. In this case, right, it's used in the sense of applying it to a man. Parthenos, the last point here, says a man who was abstained from all uncleanness and whoredom, attendant on idolatry, and so has kept his chastity. Point one who has never had intercourse with women, right? So this is one that has decided by choice and resolution to stay that way. Paul's saying, well, he's that's more props to you, right? So then he that giveth her in marriage doeth well, but he that giveth her not in marriage doeth better. NLT, so the person who marries his fiance does well, and the person who doesn't marry does even better. Why? Because he is able to give or dedicate more time without distractions to serving the Lord, right? But Paul's saying here, once again, this is not a commandment of the Lord. This is me giving advice, right? And I'm not saying that it makes one person better than you, but doeth well, meaning he'll be in a better position, right? A better state of mind, not having the cares of this life upon him. Verse 39, the wife is bound by the law as long as her husband liveth, right? So as long as her husband is alive, she is bound by the law to remain married, right? And if she separates, she got to stay separate or come back to him. But if her husband be dead, she now is a widow. She is at liberty to be married to whom she will, right? She is now loose from that law, only in the Lord. So he's saying here, yes, she has the liberty to marry, but he's instructing that it should be really with one that is a believer, okay? Because that is it's much easier that way with some of the things the Apostle Paul listed above. See, you can both agree to say abstain from each other and fast, and pray and strengthen each other spiritually. Like it's much better for you to be in that situation than to jump back in with somebody else that's in the world. Now, that may be the case, right? Like the apostle, like he mentioned up before, you haven't sinned if you marry, but just know what it comes with. But she is happier if she so abide after my judgment. That is, if she stays, single. And I think also that I have the Spirit of God. So in the NLT, it says, but in my opinion, it would be better for her to stay single. And I think I am giving you counsel from God's Spirit when I say this. And that brings us to the end of the book of 1 Corinthians, the 7th chapter. Lord willing, that was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rachak Wadash. And until next time, Shalom.